Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes.
I'm Debs Harkins, Director of Public Health for Calderdale. In Calderdale, we're all taking some time to reflect and remember the 328 people that have died so far in Calderdale from the COVID pandemic. It's really important personally for me. Myself and my team have worked really hard over the last year to try and prevent people dying, to try and protect vulnerable people from COVID, to try and prevent the virus spreading. So it's really important that we remember why we're doing all the work that we're doing. And COVID's affected us all, hasn't it, in many different ways, through the work that we do, through losing our freedoms, from not being able to see loved ones. But those 328 people and their families have made the ultimate sacrifice and lost their lives. And while this has been a really traumatic year, we've also learnt a lot of good things that we can take forward into the future. So in Calderdale, partners have worked together like never before. We've really joined up the things we do to protect vulnerable people from COVID. Also, our communities have stepped up and really supported people that are being impacted by COVID because they've got to isolate, because they're shielding. We've got 93 community COVID champions out in communities engaging with people. We've got lots and lots of mutual aid groups, people in communities that are working together to help people get them food, get them support, take the pets for a walk. So I think we've got some fantastic things to take forward out of COVID into a better future for Calderdale.
I'm Canon Hilary Barber and the Vicar of Halifax and Vice Chair of Calderdale Interfaith. I'm stood in the Duke of Wellington Chapel next to the trees of remembrance. Whilst the Minster was closed during the first lockdown from March to July, with the support of the public health team and a loyal band of volunteers, we've been able to stay open throughout most of the pandemic for a few hours each day. We've seen many thousands of people come to sit quietly, light a candle and write a prayer on a tag and then tie it onto the trees. Even if you're not a person of faith, I'm sure you will appreciate that we've all needed some space at different times of the year to try and make sense of what is happening around us, be that in church, mosque, temple, gurdwara, synagogue, or out on the moors, or simply in the back garden. I've never experienced anything like this ever before in my lifetime, and neither will any of you. I want to acknowledge the suffering of families who've experienced the separation from loved ones, whether that be our children or grandchildren, family members in care homes, and people living at home in isolation for months on end, even families who've been forced together when they normally survive by living pretty independent lives. I want to acknowledge the amazing people of Calderdale who've cared for the sick and the dying. Those at Calderdale Royal, those doctors and nurses and support staff out in the community, the local authority and the public health teams, funeral directors and all faith leaders who've had to prepare the dying and bury the dead. And all of you now mourning the loss of loved ones. I want to acknowledge all those in the private, public and voluntary third sectors who've literally fed us, provided additional food and clothing, furloughed staff to try and protect jobs, grants made available, support for people suffering mental health, suicide, domestic violence, gone shopping for those isolating and shielding, continue to collect our waste and recycling, and through the worst of the Minster grit our roads through snow and ice. And now as winter begins to thaw and the temperature starts to rise, the sun comes out and warms our heart and makes us want to smile again. One of the national inspirations during this year came from an unexpected member of the Duke of Wellington Regiment, now Captain Sir Tom Moore, who, although he died in the new year, aged over 100, made us all smile as he walked up and down his garden as we all clapped for the NHS on our doorsteps. The roadmap for unlocking the current restrictions we're all living under has now been shared. We all long to return to some sort of new normal, reclaiming that which we've lost, discarding that which we no longer need, putting right things that were never good before COVID-19, and rediscovering our sense of community and pride as Yorkshire people, living here in the best borough of the north in Calderdale. For the Christian community, we are now approaching Holy Week, when we remember the journey Jesus took to his death on a cross on Good Friday and his rising again on Easter Day. We could look back over 2020 and say that humanity's experienced something of that journey and the suffering of Good Friday. And now we turn our thoughts towards a new Easter Day, a new horizon, towards a new way of living, in which we take the opportunity before us now to help shape and influence a better and kinder world in which we can all flourish, from birth right the way through until our death, with a life full of potential and fulfillment for us all. We all need to look towards the sun in hope of a happy future for everyone.
2020 was a momentous year for us in Calderdale, for our nation and for the whole world, as we found ourselves experiencing a worldwide pandemic on our very doorsteps. Our whole lives have been turned upside down, with 3 lockdowns, large numbers of people becoming infected with coronavirus, and over 120,000 people dying across the nation, including some 300 here in Calderdale. There has been so much suffering and hardship. Some people working through the most extremes of circumstances, especially across the NHS, with others losing their jobs and businesses, many on benefits having to make use of food banks and other charity support, and children unable to attend school, college, university. Places of worship have been closed, with festivals for all the faith communities significantly disrupted. Not surprisingly, people are tired and often angry and frustrated, and issues of mental health are being laid bare for us all to see. And yet, in the midst of all that suffering, we find across Calderdale, as we always do, resilience and determination, both to care for their neighbours and to ensure that the poorest and most vulnerable are looked after. And for those who have plenty, to share, and with those who have considerably less power over their lives and daily living.
Today marks 1 year since the first anniversary of the lockdown last year, and of course it's a time to reflect over the last 12 months what's been happening in Calderdale as a result of the pandemic. And of course we've had the passing of over 300 people from Calderdale, and that's had a massive impact really on our people and our communities. But of course, in every crisis, there's something to learn from it, and I think there's been a great victory in the sense that the people of Calderdale have come together. Particularly, of course, all the lockdown restrictions have been there to protect the NHS, to protect the National Health Service, and to save lives. And I think if the people of Calderdale hadn't responded in such a positive way, following the guidance from the government and from the local authority and from the National Health Service, then many, many more lives would have been lost. So we can take some positive from that. But also I think it's really brought together our communities in a way that we haven't seen in the past, working together, supporting each other, and of course all the institutions and agencies in Calderdale have worked together and collaborated. Primary care, general practice, community and voluntary sector, and the hospital, of course, have all been working together with the local authority and to protect lives and to provide health and care services for people through this very difficult time. And of course, more recently, which has been a great positive and really a source of hope for us all, has been the establishment in Calderdale of the vaccination programme, the COVID vaccination programme, which really is up and running in such a positive way. We've got through all the first set of tiers, and it's worked extremely well in Calderdale, probably as well as anywhere in the country. The vaccination centres have been set up in each of our 5 localities. At Boots in the town centre, one of the first community pharmacies to set up a vaccination centre. Also at the hospital, they're vaccinating hundreds and hundreds of patients every week. So we're well on top of the vaccines, and that's going to have a great impact. That's probably the thing that's going to get us out of this mess and looking towards a much brighter future. So I would, of course, on that note, encourage everybody to take up the opportunity to have the vaccine. Some of our populations in Calderdale have been very reticent to come forward and have the vaccines, particularly from the BAME community, the Black Asian minority ethnic communities. So I would encourage you, if you get the opportunity, if you're invited for a vaccine, come out, get your vaccine, let's walk forward in Calderdale together and hope for a brighter future.
It's now a year since the pandemic really started, and we want to take this moment just to reflect on the experience. We recognise the real impact that the virus has had on families, on jobs and employment, and also on our health services. And we thank all of you for the sacrifices that you've made during this difficult period. We want to take some time today to reflect on the people that we've lost and to give our sympathies to their friends and their families on behalf of the Borough of Calderdale. In a moment, we're going to have a minute's silence and join together to remember those that we've lost. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Andy Lockie, and I'm a consultant in accident and emergency medicine here at Calderdale Royal Hospital. Over the last year, the world has turned upside down. Here in the accident and emergency department, we've seen incredibly poorly people coming in with COVID. We've seen people who have sadly died, and we've also seen people who have recovered but have long-lasting problems as a result of this nasty pandemic. But the impact hasn't just been felt here in A&E, it's been felt all throughout the organisation, at an individual level, at a departmental level, and at a whole organisational level. We've seen some great examples of individuals who've gone over and above the call of duty. For example, a driver who drove 500 miles overnight to pick up personal protective equipment ready for the morning shift. A staff nurse who herself had COVID, who immediately on recovery donated plasma for the benefit of others. We've seen working practices change beyond all recognition. Members of staff who have worked flexible hours, flexible annual leave. We've seen working processes change using increased technology and the benefits that come from that. And at an organisational level, we've been at the forefront of international research to look into new treatments for COVID. But ultimately, there are still personal tragedies that have come out of this pandemic. I'm stood next to the plaque for two members of the emergency care staff who sadly lost their lives this previous year, one of them to COVID. And that is an example that is reflected throughout the organisation. Our thoughts are obviously with their family and friends. Here at Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust, we believe in delivering outstanding, compassionate care to the communities that we serve, and we will continue to do that.
As we mark the first anniversary of the first person who died from COVID-19, it is right to reflect on our collective, organisational and individual journeys and experiences. Calderdale and its people have a reputation for resilience, and even through these difficult times and in the face of such loss and sadness for so many, that reputation remains. It is to this and to the kindness we see every day that I draw strength, and I know the same can be said for many of my police colleagues. Like many of our public sector and community-based partners and colleagues, we have had to tread a difficult path through this pandemic, but throughout this time our only goal has been to protect the public. Our staff's bravery and tolerance has been evident in their sensitive and compassionate approach and our desire to work with our communities, primarily through engagement and explanations. However, just like everyone else, we're also members of that community. We are wives, husbands, fathers, mothers, brothers and sisters, and this means that the pandemic has had a significant impact on us too. And I thank my colleagues for their ongoing hard work and dedication to the communities they serve. We all care deeply. The vast majority of the public have and continue to support us and our partners in keeping the risk to public health as low as possible and ensuring that we minimise the loss of life amongst our community in Calderdale. We will never forget those we have lost in such an untimely way through this pandemic. Our promise to them must be to continue to support each other, protect each other and do everything we can to prevent more unnecessary deaths.
Schools have always been at the heart of their communities, and this has been brought to the fore significantly this past 12 months. As schools, we're used to dealing with emergencies and crises, but the continuous crisis management and reactive leadership has challenged all of us and taken its toll. Children have demonstrated amazing resilience of being in school, switching to remote learning, back to school, bubble closures, then remote learning, and so on. At Holy Trinity, we were fortunate to be able to provide all Key Stage 2 children with a device, and all EYFS and Key Stage 1 children who needed it with one also. Making up for social engagement and time with friends, however, is not so easy, and the joy of the children being back in school in the last few days has been inspiring. Parents have been a great support, offering words of encouragement and thanks to staff in school who've been providing education for key worker children and vulnerable children. They've turned their hand to new technologies to support their child's learning at home and relearned a number of their own English and maths concepts. The fronted adverbial, a favourite, I believe. School staff have been quite literally phenomenal. Turning their hand to remote education, a steep learning curve in the use of technology to support learning, knowing their live lessons would be listened to not only by children, but by parents as well. They've delivered food parcels, they've done socially distanced home visits to check on the welfare of children, all whilst managing their own family demands and dealing with the additional, overriding anxiety of continuing to be in work when others were working from home or in isolation. Holy Trinity is a school where faith matters, and the strong faith ethos that underpins our school has been enhanced by the compassion, love and hope values that our staff, parents and children of faith share together.
It's really a time for us to reflect on what's actually happened over the last 12 months, but also it's a sense of hope for us to move forward. The vaccinations that are taking place now are there to protect us and save us, and hopefully we can move forward and get back to some form of normality.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. في إطار الاحتفال بالذكرى السنوية الأولى لأول حالة وفاة بسبب فيروس كورونا في كولدرديل، وتبعه بعد ذلك أكثر من 300 حالة وفاة، نستطيع أن نقول أنها كانت سنة ملآنة بالتحديات والصعوبات على الجميع. وبالنسبة للجالية المسلمة فكانوا كغيرهم من الذين تعرضوا للقيودات الاحترازية التي كان لابد منها لسلامة الجميع. ربما كانت هذه أول مرة في حياتهم يجربون يعني رمضان بعيدا عن المساجد، افتقدوا الجمع والجماعات والاجتماعات التي كانوا يشعرون فيها بوحدتهم واتحادهم. ولكننا الحمد لله نحرز خطوات إلى الأمام ونحرز تقدما فعالا جدا في التغلب على هذا الفيروس. نستطيع بإذن الله تبارك وتعالى باتحادنا وقوتنا ووعينا أن نتغلب عليه قريبا وعاجلا جدا إن شاء الله. ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يزيل عنا الكرب وأن يكشف الغمة عنا وعن الناس جميعا. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يرفع عنا البلاء والوباء وأن يخفف عنا الآلام وأن يشفي جميع المرضى. ونسأله سبحانه وتعالى أن يؤمننا في أوطاننا وأبداننا وأن يبارك لنا جميعا. آمين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
I'm Amanda Dolby of Amanda Dolby Funeral Services at Salter Hebble Hill in Halifax. To begin with, I don't mind admitting that we were terrified at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't think we realised the impact that this pandemic was going to have on the community and us working on the front line. I think I speak on behalf of all the funeral directors in Calderdale. There have been many challenges over the last year, particularly on the families who couldn't even attend funeral services to begin with, and many restrictions were put upon them. It was heartbreaking at times for them and us, but we did do our best to give people a memorable and dignified funeral service. So today we've lit our candle at Halifax Minster for all the families and for all the people that they've lost. The good news is that all our team have now had the vaccination, and so we can carry on working with families safely in Calderdale for the foreseeable future. So thank you NHS, and we'd like to say thank you to all our friends, colleagues, ministers, vicars, celebrants, everyone who's helped and supported us over the last year. We couldn't have worked on the front line without you, and we thank you for your prayers and guidance during this time.
To say that the last 12 months have been challenging would certainly be an understatement. As an organisation, we've really had to change the way in which we work. And I'm so proud of all our staff, the volunteers and my board of trustees who have supported us to make sure we can do this. First and foremost, as an organisation that's always offered face-to-face support, we've had to change the way we do things. So the majority of our work has been undertaken by telephone or via wider platforms such as Zoom. This has worked well, and for some people, they found accessing our services much easier because they haven't had to travel to the centres. But for others, many of whom may be in quite difficult situations at home, not being able to come into the centre and get the support they need has been difficult. So over this time, we've continued to offer support to enable victims of domestic abuse to access refuges. We've undertaken a great deal of telephone counselling and support. And we've also had to support people who were in emergency situations if they've needed help with gas and electric, with food, with essential items for their home. It really has been a very, very big team effort. I would just like to say on behalf of us all at Women's Centre that we are thinking about the families who have lost their loved ones during this time.
Hi, my name's Janet Limer and we set up Calderdale Community Cares at the beginning of the pandemic. And with a lot of help from Calderdale Council, Community Foundation for Calderdale, the Voluntary Sector Alliance, local councillors, friends and neighbours. We now look after over 350 people with a team of 120 volunteers. It's been hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. In the early days, the hours were long, the demands were high, and it was truly, truly overwhelming. And even now, after we're much better organised, we still have so much left still to do. I particularly remember talking to an elderly chap who was the prime carer for his even older wife, and the fear in his voice was palpable. He didn't know how to get an online shop, he'd been trying for days. He wasn't sure what to do or how he was going to get his meds delivered or continue to take care of his wonderful frail wife. We had a really good natter for 15 minutes, and at the end of it, I explained that we would all be in this together and we would all come out of this together, and he could count on us to be there with him and for his family for the duration. And as for our other families we support, through Calderdale's Never Hungry Again scheme and other grant schemes, we've been able to deliver top-up shops to those local families who need it the most over this winter period. An example was a very distressed single mum who phoned us a few weeks ago. Her hours had been cut, she had to choose between pay bills or buy food for her and her daughter. She was embarrassed, she was upset, she was reluctant to ask for help, so we now provide her with a regular wellbeing call, our weekly top-up shop through the Never Hungry Again scheme, and when that scheme ends, she'll transfer onto our food share scheme so we can continue to support her and help her budget with the money that she does have available to her. We've got her daughter a tablet so she can access the internet and keep on top of her homework and get in touch with her friends. And I feel that she feels supported and part of that bigger connected community that does recognise we are all in it together and we will all work our way out of this together. Our volunteers have been outrageously wonderful. Nothing has been too much trouble for them. We maintain that kindness is our currency in Calderdale Community Cares, and it's a currency we have in abundance. But the volunteers also tell us that they needed to volunteer regularly to help them stay well, and that regular routines and the ability to contribute to community have made a big difference to their mental well-being. And as for my wonderful elderly gent with his frail wife, well, last week we delivered a soup, a sarnie and a smile, which he utterly enjoyed. We already have his Easter egg surprise lined up to deliver shortly, and we will soon be working on getting him and hopefully his lovely lady wife out and about for a little walk with small talk as soon as it's safe and he feels ready and confident enough to go out.
Monday the 23rd, 2020 will be indelibly etched on all our memories for as long as we live on planet Calderdale, because it was the day Boris Johnson addressed the nation instructing us to stay at home, what's become known as lockdown. Only a week later, on March the 30th in Calderdale, our first COVID death was recorded, and sadly many more have succumbed to the dreadful virus since. There's no doubt COVID-19 has reshaped how we see the world. The virus and its variants continue to be an invisible enemy, leaving a trail of devastation, particularly in the BAME and elderly populations. Our incredible and world-renowned NHS have been pushed to their absolute limits, and I for one salute each and every one of them for going well beyond the call of duty. It is difficult to comprehend what it's like for our NHS heroes, having to face suffering and death in such numbers on a daily basis. What's also difficult to imagine is how the vulnerable and elderly in our communities would have coped without the voluntary and community sector here in Calderdale. The community foundation I run is managing a couple of COVID-related campaigns in partnership with Calderdale Council. These campaigns have attracted significant funds from the National Emergencies Trust and plentiful donations from Calderdale people, and this generosity has been forwarded onto local charities as grants to help the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in our communities. During the pandemic, the voluntary sector have worked all hours selflessly to ensure families and individuals across Calderdale are fed, supported, entertained, transported and listened to. I wish I could name all the organisations and people involved, but you know who you are. And on behalf of all the people you have served and are serving, thank you. Thank you for being there in our time of need and for making the last 12 months a little more bearable. Abraham Lincoln was quoted as saying, "The best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time." This is what we must do until we can get back to the new normal, which will require just as much patience, determination and love to support our charities, local shops and businesses and our NHS to come to terms with the aftermath of the pandemic.
The experience of losing a loved one impels us towards a deeper understanding of life. Everyone fears and is saddened by death. That is natural. But in struggling to overcome the pain and suddenness of death, we are sharply aware of the dignity and preciousness of life and develop the compassion to share the suffering of others as our own.
O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavour and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord.